Welcome to the MrpTech Podcast. This is episode 59. My name is Matt, and this is the weekly podcast discussing everyday tech for everyday people. And boy, after last week's episode, I got quite a bit of feedback that I want to get into in just a little bit. And that was the episode on climate change that we talked about last week. So this morning, I got up, and where I live, it has been raining for like 4 weeks straight. Every day, my drive to work is miserable, starting to feel like a duck, and it's just rained for like a month. And so this morning, my alarm clock went off, and I kind of woke up, and I sort of stood up. I put my tie-dye t-shirt on and my headband on, and lit up some incense and listened to some Beatles music, and stepped out of my Volkswagen bus, and sure enough, the sun was out. The first time I've seen the sun in a long time, and the weather up here has gone from 30 degrees to 60 degrees, back to 30 degrees, and now today is supposed to be 87 degrees, way up in the boonies here. And so before I get into, and you may be catching on to my subtleties here, one particular listener in mind, I'm sort of poking fun at him. We'll get into that in just a little bit in the listener feedback. But before I get into the listener feedback from last week, what I want to talk about is just briefly some fun that I had this weekend. My wife and I decided to get out of town for the weekend, and we had a family engagement to go to near Boston, and we decided to check out a couple things near Boston for the fun of it. So the first thing we did is we went to the Stone Zoo as part of Zoo New England, and there are a couple of different size zoos in the Boston area. And this one happened to be the smaller one, happened to be closer by to where we were going, and kind of a neat little spot. It's sort of in a secluded area off one of the major interstates through the area. And we went there primarily to see a couple of different animals. I wanted to see the snow leopard, and they also had a wolf there that I was interested in, a Mexican wolf that I wanted to go see. And so we took a couple hours, and we just kind of walked through the zoo. And it's not quite tourist season, I would imagine, not yet. So they didn't really have a lot up and running at this point in time, but I was pleasantly surprised with all of the different animals that were staying there. And it was sort of a nice stroll through a park, basically. And we saw some bald eagles, we saw a couple of cougars and jaguar, and different various species of apes and monkeys, as well as some other types of birds throughout the zoo itself. Nice little walk. The highlight of the walk was definitely the large cats that we saw. And when we got to the wolves, we had trouble finding them because they were in such a large encagement that they were perched way up at the top of a hill, and they're sort of onlooking everything. They were sort of sunbathing, like most of the animals were. Time with that we went to the zoo, most of the animals were probably ready for naps at that point, so they didn't seem too motivated to or too bothered by the tourists. We were surrounded by a large group of elementary students arriving in school buses. And even with that, it was still kind of a fun walk to get out for the morning. And after that, after we saw what we came to see, we decided to hop on the interstate, and we went to the Boston Museum of Science. And this was kind of a fun trip. I went to the Boston Museum of Science when I was really young, just prior to when the Big Dig started in Boston, and that's all I could remember really from it, is that they were starting construction on the tunnels and the bridges, and it was just going to be this massive project to kind of alleviate the traffic heavy traffic that the city faces. And so I was very young when I went, and so we strolled around, and I forgot how hands-on the museum is. There's a lot of really neat things to take a look, and really interactive scenes throughout the whole museum. One of the things that we really were kind of interested in seeing is the planetarium show. One of the shows was actually narrated by Patrick Stewart from Star Trek and the X-Men series, and we didn't get there just in time. We didn't get there to actually see that, which was no big deal. There was a lot of things that we were trying to do in one day, but what they do with this planetarium area is when they're not using like Explore the Universe type of scenes on the planetarium, they do these experiences, music experiences, like the Prince experience, where you're having like laser light shows in the planetarium. And they also have like a Radiohead experience in the Bjork experience. We were kind of interested in the Lady Gaga experience and the something called Laser Floyd, the Dark Side of the Moon experience. They were later on at night, and we didn't actually get to go see those. But what a cool thing if you're in the Boston area and you want to go get and see some really cool technology stuff. One of the things that we did, we managed to go past an exact replica of the DeLorean from the Back to the Future. That was really cool to kind of take a look into. I've never actually been up close to something like that before. So exact replica of the alien from the Alien movies. That was kind of fun to see, as well as a control module from the Apollo missions, which is kind of cool. You could actually climb in, and you could actually kind of sit the way the scientists or the astronauts would prior to launch. So you're sitting kind of up straight, and you can kind of see the control setup that they have. It was kind of a fun afternoon, and going to see stuff that we don't normally get to see. Being from way up in the boonies. And so we had a fun day out going to the zoo and the Museum of Science. And if you've never been to those before, definitely encourage you to check those out. It's not that expensive to get into if you're traveling through the area, and you could spend all day at the Science Museum really exploring what they have to offer. We went. They had a butterfly suite where they were hatching butterflies. That was kind of cool to see. Really small section of the museum. Sort of reminded me when I took a trip to the Biodome, and when my wife and I took the trip to the Biodome and Botanical Gardens in Montreal. Similar to that, the butterfly exhibit was much smaller than the Botanical Gardens in Montreal, but overall it was really kind of a fun trip, and certainly recommend that to anybody who's interested in that type of stuff, especially the planetarium stuff, or being technology advocates. Sometimes a lot of people are interested in science as well. So I thought I'd bring that up to all of you out there to see if that's something that you might be interested in. So anyway, we've got some listener feedback to get into. And last week, I brought up a kind of a heavy topic, and I did that for a reason. The reason I did that is to kind of grow as a podcaster, and what I thought I approached it in the right way, and the way that I approached it was, I wasn't looking to change anybody's opinions on the topic. I was trying to tell a story of the research that I had done over the last 2 weeks. And with that, I'm also trying to push the boundaries a little bit of what I can do as someone who gets on a microphone and talks to you all every week. And so I sort of knew prior to doing this podcast that I would hear some people that had differing opinions, and I definitely knew that was going to happen. And when I said that last week, that I respect everyone's opinions on this topic, I really meant that. And so I did get some listener feedback to some things that I said last week, and I would like to, as I mentioned, I would air out some of those things that were sent to me over the last week. So I got an email from Ken, and Ken is from Washington State, and he says, and I'm just going to read the email to you. He says, I think you've been hoodwinked in the climate change hoax. You mentioned NASA as a source of your data. NASA info has been under the control of the last administration, the Obama administration, who was a total climate change advocate and changed many agencies to go along with his view. Therefore, anything NASA says has to be taken with a grain of salt. You mentioned the EPA as something that President Trump has shelved, and as he rightfully should. The EPA believed in the hoax of climate change and did all in its power to regulate everything so nothing could be accomplished. Trump undid that nonsense. You might want to check out Rush Limbaugh and what he has to say about climate change before you jump into such a hasty conclusion. I enjoy listening to your podcast, but I feel you are being led down the wrong path on this climate change stuff. In Washington State, the governor was trying to get a carbon tax to fight climate change. Not sure how all the tax would be able to fight this, but he keeps trying. On a side topic, you mentioned ham radio as another interest. You might want to check out Twit because they have a podcast dedicated to ham radio if you haven't done so already. And so Ken and I sent back and forth a few other messages about this topic, and I definitely appreciated the heads up about the ham radio show. And if you're interested in ham radio, that show is called Ham Nation. I was unaware of that show, and I actually subscribed to a lot of the Twit shows, so that was really cool that Ken sent that to me this week. So again, one of the things that I said last week is I think I made a pretty good case for both sides. You're having to take a grain of salt of what both sides of this topic have to say. You have to deal with climate change advocates receiving funding and money to produce these results. I mentioned that last week. I also mentioned that the other side as well, and that pretty much anybody can create a graph to show something. So definitely I agree with everything that he kind of said there. So one of the things that I said to Ken, I said, okay, so let's say that you're right and I'm wrong, and let's say that I'm headed down the wrong path. Because one of the things that I said was I sort of was leaning towards being a climate change advocate with all the information I saw. And I said, help me out, get me headed in the right direction, and send me any info that you have that the fact that the climate change is a hoax. And so he mentioned going and watching Rush Limbaugh videos. So before he actually sent me some Rush Limbaugh stuff, I actually went and I listened to some Rush Limbaugh climate change discussions from his show. And so, Ken, this isn't directed towards you. This next part is directed towards Rush Limbaugh. And so one of the things I did is the very first video that I came across, Rush Limbaugh going on the climate change hoax rant. And so I started watching this video, and his explanation was that climate change advocates are people who are stupid, dumb, and weak, who live meaningless lives, and those are quotes from Rush Limbaugh. So this didn't start off very well. Okay, so basically he was saying that these people who are climate change advocates are always thinking, "Why am I here?" And that as soon as the climate change issue comes up, they can go from having a meaningless life to saving the planet. And what a great way to sort of catch people hook, line, and sinker to go from their meaningless lives to saving the planet, going from not mattering to having a life that matters because they're doing the right thing and they're saving the planet. So he also mentioned that these nut jobs who are climate change activists drive their Priuses around and thinking that they're doing a better thing for the environment. So full disclosure here, I don't drive a hippie Volkswagen bus at all. I do drive a Prius though, and it's oddly enough, it's not to save the environment. I have a long commute to work, and the gas mileage is great on the Priuses. That's the reason I drive a Prius. Not really to change to save the environment, although or save on emissions from my cars, I should say. So my first issues there with Rush Limbaugh, I was a little insulted at first because number one, I'm not stupid, I'm not dumb, and I'm not weak. And I have a master's degree. I am certified in several different wide-ranging topics, and I do a lot of manual work, especially when it comes to the summertime and my summer employment job. So, and most of all, I don't believe I live a meaningless life. I'm a teacher. I work with students all the time. Outside of school, I do things that I feel make the world a better place, or my local area that I live in a better place. And climate change isn't that outlook to save the planet, to make myself feel better. So I was a little caught off guard by that. And once again, Ken, this isn't directed towards you. This is directed towards the videos that I saw of Rush Limbaugh. And so I just want to make that clear. So I don't upset anyone. But I didn't stop there. So I did get the info that Ken sent me. He sent me a whole PDF of a transcript of a Rush Limbaugh show, talking about why solar doesn't work, companies that have been shut down due to lack of people purchasing the products, so basically, and also this I went on also learning about Rush Limbaugh mentioned something about a global cooling period that is expected, a mini ice age between 2030 and 2040. I'm not going to really respond to this. I'm just going to say I went and did the research. I went and looked up this, and basically everything that I heard Rush Limbaugh saying, I took what he said and looked, tried to look for the facts, and I tried to look for facts supporting and facts against in that case. And basically the European researchers that predicted, because of low solar activity, they predicted a mini ice age from 2030 to 2040. Basically, their research has been debunked because they mentioned a 60% decrease in solar activity, and if a 60% decrease in solar activity were to happen, there would be no life on Earth. So there's a lot of misquotes there in their research, and scientists have gone through and said, yes, the solar cycles are monitored, which is really cool. If you've ever seen the way that they do this, you can actually download some apps, and you can actually get the data from the sun, from satellites monitoring the sun at any time. That's good for radio operators. It's good for a lot of different things. So the technology behind that's pretty awesome. But anyway, so some of the things that Rush Limbaugh had to say, there was some validity to, but again, I found in favor of a few other things. Another thing that Rush Limbaugh said, he kept saying, and this is another different video that I saw, that there was no official data on climate change, no official data stating that climate change was man-made, and he kept saying this over and over and over. No official data. Well, I found that kind of strange, because here's the definition of official: a person holding public office or having official duties, especially as a representative of an organization or government department, or relating to an authority or public body and its duties, actions, and responsibilities. Okay, so official data, to me, there is mounds and mounds and mounds of data, official data. And there have been 13,000 peer-reviewed papers since 1995 for climate change, and 24 of those were against climate change. Now, with that said, before you start writing an email, these government agencies are funded, to do climate change research. And one of the things that I'm looking for is agencies that are funded to try to prove that climate change isn't real. And if I find some of that stuff, maybe I'll bring it up in a show in the future. There's got to be something out there that is funded to try to prove these other theories, and maybe there isn't. And so I'm working on that. So the other thing Rush Limbaugh did is he compared climate change advocates to Hitler, and I'm just not even going to comment on that. That. Moving on from there. So Ken, thanks so much for your email. You sent a lot of great stuff. I did go through the transcript from Rush Limbaugh that you sent me. I can't say that I still agree on anything on there, but I do respect your opinion, and hopefully my emails to you reflected that. I think there are whack jobs on both sides of this argument, and it is a political, very political thing. That's one of the things that I learned about this, and I'm not a very political person to begin with. I'm the type of person that just wants government officials to do their job and do their job well, and try to get things done for the positive of everyone. And so I'll stay out of the politics of which administration did what and that type of thing. And I think the important part that happens is when people actually have discussions rather than just blatantly making comments and just thinking the other side is completely crazy. And I think that was kind of my overall goal, was just to learn about the other side. So moving on to another sort of bunch of feedback that I got. I received an audio clip from a listener, and I'm not going to say who it was. He's been a longtime listener of the show. Really enjoys, and both of everybody that I heard from actually was really friendly and really respectful when sending this stuff. So I definitely appreciate that, because this was a tricky topic. And so I received some audio feedback from a listener who didn't want me to play the audio on air, so I'm not going to do that. But he did give me permission to basically paraphrase things that he said. So first of all, one of the things he was sort of being tongue in cheek, and there were some very good points that he had. He brought up a lot of things. And the first thing that he did, he called me an eco warrior or an eco evangelist. And one of the things that I responded back to him in this was, honestly, I would call myself an eco nonchalantist, to be honest with you. I've always advocated for the environment, but climate change is a different debate, and I may have stumbled on my words a little bit in the last podcast, because I did compare environment and climate change to two different things. And really, honestly, I didn't know much about climate change other than what I've seen on TV or heard and read in newspapers and stuff like that. And I wasn't really trying to prove that I was right being an advocate for the environment. I was actually trying to find evidence to the contrary of what I was thinking, because I've never done the research before. I had never heard the term eco warrior or eco evangelist until I got those comments. But one of the things that I have as what I would call eco nonchalantist is I have hard enough time remembering to take out the recycling every week. And so to say that I was an eco warrior, I just wouldn't call myself that. And I told them all this in an email. And so I had to be really careful on some of the comments that I said, because I didn't want to insult anybody. But he had some good points of things like smog. This person lived in California for a long time, and he said that he would drive through a pass and smog would be really irritating and hard to breathe. And by 2001, when he left, the smog was better. And one of the comments that I had for him was, that to me seems like, I'm not sure about California, but I know in New York and in other states, there was emissions regulations that were put in the early 90s, maybe even late 80s, early 90s, several iterations of it. And I'm wondering if that has to do with the clearing up of smog in those areas. And so yeah, even those emissions, if they're hurting and burning, I would say that those are still bad for your health. Another thing that he brought up as a listener was the parts per million of CO2 in climate change, it being only 0.008. So how can that have a big impact on the environment? And, At first glance, that makes sense. That's something that I did come across when I did all the research that I did in those 2 weeks. And the stuff that I came up with had good explanations for why CO2 was dangerous, even at that limited level. But I can definitely see that's a perspective that listeners would have, saying, well, if it's such a minute amount, how is that dangerous? And so I can see and I can respect their opinions, but from what I read, they had a legitimate reason for it. So this particular listener also called me a hippie, and he was being more or less tongue in cheek, and he was just kind of teasing a little bit, being a hippie from New York and living way out in the boonies. So that's why I had those comments out in front. Hopefully he appreciated those. So definitely not a hippie. Don't have a Volkswagen, don't have any tie-dye shirts, don't have headbands. I may have a couple of Beatles recordings because the Beatles are great. Don't have any incense, that type of stuff. I do drive a Prius. I was honest with him, and I told him in the email, that's the reason why I drive a Prius is I have a long drive and the gas mileage is great. So that's that. So we actually had a great conversation back and forth, and he actually was very helpful, and the feedback that I received was really great, and I was totally expecting someone who disagreed with me to write in and tell me that I was wrong, and to be honest, that's exactly what I wanted to happen. I always say I'd love to hear feedback from the show, and so doing a show on climate change, I thought was a way to sort of stir the pot a little bit and see who is out there that may have had some comments and it's a very political thing and I'm not a political person, and so I tried to and the people that emailed me, some of them didn't believe that I was trying to be level-headed and look at both sides. You can't really feel how I feel, and you can't really think how I think. But I actually, in my opinion, I was trying to be as non-biased as I could. I really wanted to see the other side's perspective, and I was, hopeful that maybe I could come across and maybe start believing that it was a hoax. And so stirring the pot a little bit, I wanted to sort of gauge who our listeners were out there. And so I was really pleased by the feedback that I got. And, you don't have to agree with me. And if you do agree on stuff, send me that stuff too. You can, send me an email, tell me that you've tried things that I try or are working on things that I'm working on. And, it makes this more fun for me to do. I know these emails that I got that were telling me that I was wrong, I was actually enjoying reading these emails. They were respectful. They weren't negative in any way. They were just trying to show me their thoughts and their opinions. And that's what I've been asking for in these various episodes week after week. So it's this show can be engaging, and that's sort of what I was looking for. And I probably won't do such controversial topics all the time. In fact, I don't like to be controversial by any means. But it was fun for me to hear from these listeners because it was something that they were passionate about, something that they tried. And anytime I get feedback from shows, it makes me feel like, hey, I keep doing this. This is really fun. And so the show kind of grows when that happens. And so thanks to all the people who gave feedback. I super definitely appreciate everything that you guys had to say, whether or not you agreed or disagreed or whatever it was, because honestly, on some of the comments in the emails, there was common ground. The listener that sent in the audio clip, they mentioned that absolutely the humans are terrible to the environment. They're throwing garbage out of their cars and just adding to messes everywhere. And he basically said, you want to say that's happening? Absolutely, I'm right there with you. And so there's common ground on all this stuff. And the point was, if you're in a boat where you are not sure where to stand and you're not sure what to believe, my suggestion on this is, and I said this last week, do your own research and come up with your own opinion. Don't I won't tell you don't, but be careful when it comes to thoughts by a single individual or someone in the public eye who's very opinionated. Because as I said, anybody can take a small fragment of information and change it the way that they want it to be presented. And anybody can make a graph, anybody can make and show their points in any way that they feel is necessary. And so I came across that quite a bit on both sides for advocates and deniers of climate change. And it wasn't until I actually went and looked at the actual data that I started, being reaffirmed with my original opinion on the topic. And I'm still, and as I said to this last week, I'm still going through more information on this, and there are pros and cons to both sides. And hopefully, I'm not out to change anybody's opinions, but hopefully somebody who does their own opinions, if you've done the research and you've looked at the actual data yourself and not just listen to somebody talking on a microphone, okay? Notice I'm not trying to change anybody's opinions, okay? And hopefully, being a terrible speaker, hopefully you all realize that I'm not trying to sway anybody in particular in any one way. I may sound like it if it comes out wrong, or if I'm saying something stupid. You might think that I'm trying to do that, but I'm really not. I was actually trying to learn for myself, and so that's what I'm doing. I'm encouraging you all to come up with your own opinions on things, and if you disagree with me, that's great, and I'm glad to hear from you. And so I think I'm going to let it go here. There was some other feedback that I got as well, but basically I covered all the topics that people were saying. So thanks everybody for all the emails that you sent in, and I certainly expected it, and so and hopefully it makes for a greater show. So that's going to do it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.